It's a scary movie.
Be afraid. Be very afraid.
I see dead people. You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Here's Johnny.
The power of Christ compels you! The power of Christ compels you!
Whatever you do, don't fall asleep.
Welcome to Talking Horror with Jamie and Nikisha.
Hi, I'm Jamie.
And I'm Nikisha, and this is Talking Horror with Jamie.
And Nikisha,
where we share our love for spooky things and talk horror through the lens of human behavior. Welcome, guys. And today is exciting for so many reasons because I cannot wait to hear you guys' thoughts on this, but we are talking about the 2009 American psychological horror movie, The Uninvited. Ooh.
What are you looking for, Anna? Is it these, or are you looking for these? You should take them. Please, they mean nothing to me.
We know, Rachel. We know everything.
You got me. Here.
So this movie was directed by the Guard brothers, and it is a remake of the 2003 South Korean horror film, A Tale of Two Sisters. It stars Emily Browning, Elizabeth Banks, Ariel Kebbel, and David Strathairn. So obviously there's going to be heavy spoiler alerts. We're going to be going through everything that is this movie. And Jamie, are there any trigger warnings?
Oh yeah, this one kind of has a doozy of things going on. So trigger warnings for suicide, for violent murder, for infanticide or young children murders. I like kind of some assaulty, like sexual assault on the verge of, and like a lot of, mental health flags, psychiatric hospitalization. I think, is that everything? That was like a mouthful.
That was a mouthful. It is a lot happening in this movie. So yes, all of the things will be discussed. So if those are things that make you feel uncomfortable or queasy on the inside, you might want to pass on this one. But before we get into everything, was there anything new that you guys watched? What's happening? What's going on in your lives right now?
What is new?
What did we watch? Oh, this is a random male noise here.
Did we mention that we started Yellow Jackets?
Yeah, we I think we talked about that last week, but
okay,
we're watching more of it.
Still watching it.
Lots more things. Well, a lot of things have come out too on Netflix. The TV show We're All Dead, or
oh
yeah,
I was thinking of that other long one, the lady in the window, behind the curtains under the desk, the new
hiding
Kristen
in plain
Bell.
sight.
Yeah.
The new Kristen Bell movie, yes, which I think we're probably going to hit on both of those sometime soon. So that'll be exciting. I'm excited to watch all of those things.
Servant season 3 came out. We're still in the middle of season 2. A lot of crazy stuff. I'm in the middle of watching Batman Returns, which is pretty spooky and scary in some ways.
I love the Tim Burton Batman so much.
Oh, fantastic.
My gosh.
Spooky.
I was about to say we watched The Uninvited this week.
Good one.
Fantastic. I mean, well, we're in it to win it.
Well, Nikisha, did you watch anything?
I didn't. Last episode, I had a doozy of things because we had a 3-week layoff. And so I had the time. This week, we hit the ground running with more shows than imagined.
Sure.
And I have not had time to watch anything but this. So, yes. And this was good for me to watch. This is my second time watching it, actually, and we'll get into all of that after the plot summary. But let's get into The Uninvited. There's so many things. I'll take the reins for the plot summary on this one.
I invite you to take it on.
Yes.
What's the plot?
All right.
Let's do this.
I have it 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Ready, set, the plot.
So we open up in a psych ward. We meet Anna, who has been put there because she committed suicide after her mother got burned in a house fire. And it's time for her to go home. And so she goes home to see her father and his new girlfriend that has moved in. And she's like, oh, what the hell? So she runs to her sister and she's like, what has happened? Her sister is like, well, this is what's happened now. And you left me. And now dad is with a new girlfriend. And so Anna's trying to just get back to her life. She's having all of these dreams about her mother coming to her, telling her that there was a murder, that her death was not an accident, that someone actually murdered her. And so Anna and her sister Alex try to figure out what all that means. And they find all this information on the girlfriend that says that that's not even the name. It's her. She has a different name. So they are trying to figure out who this actual woman is. They think that she is probably someone who had killed a couple of children in her last house that she was a nurse at. And so Anna tries to go to the police while Alex is staying at the house trying to get evidence. But the girlfriend is like really sneaky and shady and apparently puts Alex out with a couple of meds, and then she finds Anna, puts her out as well. Anna kind of falls asleep, but then wakes up, and then she sees blood everywhere. And then she's like, what's happening? She follows the blood trail, and then the blood trail leads to the trash can, and you see the girlfriend is in the trash. And then Alex comes up with a knife, and she's like, we had to do what we had to do, Anna. And she was like, okay. And then the dad comes, and he's like, what happened? And Anna's like, the girlfriend drugged me and Alex. And the dad's like, Alex has been dead for a year. And then,
oh my God, that was the end.
Oh yes. And then that was the
end.
Wow.
Yay.
Anna killed Alex. Anna killed Rachel. That's her name. The girlfriend's name is Rachel.
And that's the plot.
Fantabulous. So I will just say that I saw this movie, or I watched it during the pandemic. And
for the first time,
the first shutdown for the first time.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And my friend, actually, Terrence, suggested it because, and actually we need to get him on the show because he's like probably our number one listener. He has watched every single, listened to every single episode.
Mm-hmm.
But he told me about this because he was like, oh, well, since you do the podcast about psychological blah, 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 this would probably be a good one to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in it to win it. I was just like, what is this? What is happening? I'm a fan of the actors and actresses in this. And I honestly was like, what the hell at the plot twist at the end. And then watching it a second time, just seeing how Alex's interactions are not within like the other family members and stuff like that. It was interesting to see, but honestly, I was fully invested in everything that was happening in this. Going back the second time, I was like, oh, this writing is kind of bad, but it was. I mean, it's a translation of the Korean remake, stuff, or the Korean original movie. So, but other than that, it was still just like, oh, yes, I like the concept. Even if the English wasn't as executed as well as it probably would have been in watching the original Korean movie, but I was a fan of it. So what about you guys? Is your first time watching it, Jamie?
No, I cannot remember when I saw this, but it was definitely a very long time ago. I don't know if I saw this in theaters, but I'm pretty sure I saw it around the time that it came out. And I've seen it many times since, and I don't know why, maybe it was on TV or something and I would just tune in, but I know I've seen it a few times.
Yeah.
And it's not for me. Not to say that it's not for other people. And I'm very interested. Like, I still haven't seen the Korean horror, A Tale of Two Sisters, but like that's on my list. I really want to see it. But I also was like, oh, is this like a shot for shot situation? Do I really want to like jump right into the same movie again?
Right.
But like probably better. So like that's kind of been my resistance. But I like, it's like both that piece of I get really frustrated when we get these like shot for shot remakes in English. And it's like, why do we have to redo this? Like, just because people like don't want to read subtitles, even though the originals are like supposed to be excellent. But then also, I mean, we'll get into it, but like just enraged at like, how is this young woman like being discharged from this hospital where like she's clearly still going through something and is at risk of harming other people? Like that someone is going to, something's going to happen to that psychiatrist, like something not so good, because like he done messed up so bad.
Truly.
And I'm just like, how is all of like, oh God, it just frustrates me so much. Not my favorite.
Cannot wait to get into it. I love it. We need like a whole just section of Jamie's frustrations. Brian, how about you? Is this your first time watching it?
This is my first time ever watching it. I did not know the twist. I did not guess the twist because I wasn't looking for it.
Right.
It's very interesting because whenever we've done quite a few of these episodes. And now whenever we're watching a movie for the podcast, like we're specifically watching it for the podcast, as opposed to like, oh my gosh, I saw this awesome movie, we should do this for the podcast. I am watching it with two different eyes, not only because I have two eyes, but because I'm watching it from two points of view. I'm watching it from like, does Brian enjoy this? Like, am I enjoying this? But also like, does this have enough to cover in terms of a perspective of mental health and human behavior, right? And so from that aspect, I thought this movie was fascinating, and I was really into all of that stuff. From the flip side of things, I wish I had seen a better version of this plot. Does that make sense? Like, I thought the plot was interesting, but I just wish everything was better about this, including the acting and the writing. So I'm a little disappointed that I just didn't watch The Tale of Two Sisters. But this one's probably more interesting to talk about because of its flaws, if that makes sense. To dig into those things. However, like during the, what was it, an hour and a half, 2 hours or something like that? Like,
no, it's just an hour and a half.
Yeah, I had a really good time watching it. I love movies with unreliable narrators, and we'll get to that. I love it so much. Like the new Moon Knight stuff coming out from Marvel, like is unreliable narrator stuff. Like Memento, like all of that unreliable narrator stuff is just like the best. So I love that. And two, man, Jamie will tell you, and we'll talk about this because it has different meaning before the movie and after the movie. I wrote down in my notes, bad dad syndrome, where I feel like in a lot of these movies there are always parents, and it always frustrates me when there are these parents that like seem awesome up front, and then there are scenes where like, why aren't you just listening to your kid? Like, what are we doing here? But during the movie, it's frustrating, and once you learn the twist, it's less frustrating because your whole
No, it's more frustrating. Call the doctor. What are you doing? Oh, I can't hear you.
Yeah, I can't hear you either.
Because I muted myself. That was silly.
Oh, okay.
I thought I was unmuting myself. I was not, because I was just talking. Good at podcasting, and this movie is not my favorite. However, I'm actually very excited to talk about it more than maybe like a movie we all really loved or a movie we all just like super hated. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I will say, I didn't know that this when I first watched this, I didn't know that it was a remake. And so when in our podcasting, when I talked about it, and Jamie was like, "Oh, it was such and such," and I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I definitely do want to watch the OG and see." But it definitely is, like you said, Brian. It's an interesting movie for this particular podcast to bring up a lot of the things that we agreed with, did not agree with, things that Jamie will debunk about psych wards and everything with the diagnosing of things and the DSM-5. We'll see where she lands in all of this stuff. But let's just get into it. So let's just start off with things that we liked, didn't like. I know, Jamie, you had some frustrations, and then we'll get into the actual questions. But is there some things up front in the forefront of your mind that you're just like, yes, I need to discuss this about this movie?
I mean, I do think it's interesting that Anna is exploring her dreams with her therapist and like talking through her inability to remember what happened. And I think like overall we figure out she's been there for like a year, right?
Yes.
That's the time frame, which is a very long time. I mean, I guess like my understanding of hospitalizations and things like that are for the most part, it's like acute. If there's like an acute, like this is like an acute trauma that happened, right? Like this fire happened, her mom died, like all very overwhelming. And then like she has a suicide attempt. But like a year seems like a really long time for her to like be hospitalized. Really? But it's, I mean, again, like she still is unable to remember, which I think also is common. I think we've talked about like how trauma affects the brain a few times on here. Yes. And that's like very normal because of how like our brain is not always able to encode things in chronological order during a traumatic event, because it's like focused on keeping us alive and, you know, prioritizing other things. So I thought that was a really interesting way to kind of like set the stage. And I feel like the stage setting is really interesting. There's just like other things where I'm like, I want this to be better, but that's very real. And I'm glad that they're also like talking about the dream piece too, because like, you know, a lot of times things are happening in our subconscious. Like we might not be like consciously aware of, you know, what had happened, but these nightmares might be kind of like little breadcrumbs that are helping her understand and unpack what she experienced. And like, it sounds like that psychiatrist is trying to help her make sense of the dreams or understand or remember. Not totally clear, like which of the above, but maybe all of the above. But yeah, I actually like appreciated some of that.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, maybe.
I want to. Okay. Thank you both. I want to talk about the timeline of the final, like what we learned to be the actual what happened. Okay, because like I'm still trying to figure out what this movie is trying to say. So if you don't mind, I'd like to, before we get into Jamie breaking this down and then Nikisha, us asking you about some of the acting choices and things like that, I want to talk about what this movie is trying to say, because I don't know the answer, and both of you have seen this multiple times. So I want to talk through this. So in reality, or in the movie's reality, they're at the lake, kissing boys and being weird, and then she gets freaked out for good reason because she doesn't want to have sex with this boy. So she runs back to the house, and her sister follows her. The mom is sick. And so they moved her. She wanted to move to the boathouse, essentially, the guest house, because it has a better view of the ocean. With that kind of house, or the lake, with that kind of house, like every obvious window has a beautiful view of the lake. This movie made me want to move to a Maine lake town.
Yes.
Okay, so she runs back, and then she catches her dad having sex with the Elizabeth Banks character. That's what kind of triggers her. So because her mom is still alive, and her dad is, quote, moving on in a gross way. So she goes to basically kill her by burning down the house, because that's what you do. And then her sister follows her. She accidentally leaves the gasoline on, and then the house blows up. And then she, we're to assume, is so guilt-ridden, feels horrible that she, between her dad and what she did and her sister being dead, she tries to kill herself. She's sent off to the ward. She meets Mildred Pierce, or Mildred whatever her name is.
Mildred Kemp.
Mildred Pierce is from something else. If one of you wouldn't mind looking that up while I'm talking, that would be great. Mildred Pierce. Mildred Kemp. And then so she is in 10 months or a year of psych ward, and then she gets out, faking it, basically pretending she's okay, or maybe she's not okay, to continue what she wanted to originally do, which is kill the nurse, the Elizabeth Banks character. Okay, fine.
Interesting.
What?
Oh, well, you said something that I thought was interesting, which is why I said out loud, interesting. The idea that she's like faking being okay to get out and like finish what she started.
So that
is what you are proposing.
Yeah. So this is actually part of what I'm confused about. So she gets out and she starts seeing her sister. We don't know if she sees her sister in the ward, because we only see her sister outside of the ward at the house.
Yes.
So, is she using her sister to justify her actions? Like, is she having this internal fight between finishing what she started and just like being just a normal, like, not, I don't want to say it, but being just a person with trauma that they're internally working with, but not hurting others. It's not supernatural. We're to assume that she's having psychotic breaks of like guilt and whatever when she sees the mom as a ghost, or as a burned corpse, like all of those things. So I'm just confused out of what this movie is trying to say about her mental state as it relates to what she's trying to do outside of the ward. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So
well, I will just say I think I agree with you, Brian, in the sense of she is using the sister as justification for her actions, as if that is kind of the voice in the back of her head that's saying, like, this is the reason why your mom and sister are dead in the first place, was because of the nurse. And so, like, let's just have a deep dive into that. But it could be just like a mix of both, because she is having like guilt trips, and that's what's having her see her mom and see her sister in the first place. Mm-hmm. But I think it's a combination of her mental state as well as her sister. You hear the voices in your head, and in this moment that voice just happens to be her sister, and it's not, something outside of that. I think
her original intention was to kill the nurse, the Elizabeth Banks character, because she was sleeping with the father. That was the initial thought process there. But in this movie, she's creating this false narrative to that this woman actually has killed before, and now she's coming for their family, kind of unrelated to, and that she killed the mother, unrelated to the fact that she may have been sleeping with the dad, or not as prevalent as a reason. So like, is she changing the reason or piling on a reason to kill her as well, to just like up the ante? Like, why isn't the first reason good enough? Why are we adding all of these pieces to it to justify her continuing what she started? Does that make sense too?
Yeah. Jamie?
I find your read super fascinating, because my read is not that she's faking it and like trying to get out. I think that she like still has all of those blocks. Like I really think that she can't remember. and maybe this is like me being super naive, but my read is that like she genuinely can't remember, and because of that, like those symptoms that she's experiencing, I think that she's having a lot of like psychotic related symptoms, so like hallucinations and delusions. I think that they're not present when she's in the hospital for whatever reason. She's in an environment where she's like getting the support that she needs. She's having regular therapy with her doctor, potentially on medication, although we don't know. And for whatever reason, like she doesn't actually remember that that's what her like plan was. And so I think that her going back to the house, I think one, the house itself is triggering. And so like that, just like returning home is already starting the process, and actually seeing Elizabeth Banks. Like once she sees Elizabeth Banks, she like, her body tenses up, like you see her reaction and like something is going on. And she still doesn't actually see her sister yet. It's only until she leaves and goes to the docks, I think. Right. And so like, I think that was kind of a spark that like starts to like bring back up some of these memories that like her brain has kind of tucked away. And like the more time that she spends in the house and around Elizabeth Banks, the more she is remembering. And so I think that at the very, very end, when she has when you like see her looking at what she thinks is her sister, but then the floodlights turn on and it's her reflection, that is like the point where like it has all come full circle, and she like everything has been revealed to her for herself. And I think that she realizes that that's the moment that she realizes that she did what she wanted to do. I think that part was like cut off from her from the point that like the explosion first happened all the way to the point where at the very end, because it wasn't her parenthesis quote. It was this like version. It was this like other version of her, so to speak. I mean, because then it begs the question of like, you know, is this a dissociative identity disorder situation where like she is embodying these alters, but she's also seeing them. So like that's like a little bit more interesting, because I've never worked with anybody with DID ever. And like there's so much that's, you know, in movies and media and things like that. So I think that the representation of DID is often not very well explained. But I don't know if someone has the ability to like actually see their alter outside of them. Like physically stand, and maybe they do, and so like that might explain more of it. But I've always kind of viewed it as more of like some kind of like weird mix that maybe doesn't make that much sense in reality, but like for the purpose of this movie, that it's, you know, symptoms of schizophrenia and also symptoms of dissociative identity disorder, and it's all kind of like culminating once she realizes that she in fact did the murder, and then like the record is set straight in her head, and now she knows that this was what she wanted in the first place.
So did she imagine that the police chief was holding her down? Like that's all not real, that the police chief was in on it, one? And
no.
And two, the police chief was in on it. And two, I'm confused. Is she? I love your read. I think that to me, you explaining it sounds like the right read. But also, too, like the whole Mildred Kemp thing. Like, is she just pulling in things that she knows or remembers from the psych ward into a new narrative? Is that what we're saying is happening there?
Yeah. I think that's exactly what happened. And with the first part, I don't think it's that like the police chief is like in on it. I think that everyone else knows that her sister is dead. And so like when she goes to the police, she's like, this person's not who they really are. all of this is happening. She says we a ton. She's referencing her sister. He knows that her sister is dead.
Mm-hmm.
And so like the first person that he's going to call is either like her dad or Rachel. And so,
right.
And I think Rachel was like trying to sedate her not to do anything evil, but like she's a nurse. So like when somebody is in this state of this like heightened crisis state, which she was multiple times, I think that she was trying to sedate her. That's what they would do in the hospital. Like if somebody is having they're like in a state of crisis and like escalated like that, people like the facilities typically will ask like, are you able to de-escalate yourself? Like they'll check in and see if you have the ability in that moment to like bring yourself down. At least again, this was one experience that I've observed.
Cool.
And if the person's like not able to do so, like then the unit staff will intervene. And you know, they can offer somebody like an oral pill that they can take, or they will give them a shot, which at this particular facility, somebody referred to it as booty juice. I will never forget that ever.
What?
Yeah, because like typically you're being injected in the butt.
Okay.
With the sedative. And like that is what they called it. And I was just like, oh my God, I'm not this is not my life. But it was.
No, I'm gonna mute myself now. Thank you very much. For real.
But I hope I answered some questions of what I at least like speculate is going on in this movie. But I think that also you still have the narrative before the twist of like everyone's out to get her and like what is really going on. So then like trying to make sense of it when it flips is also really confusing because you're trying to go back and be like, wait, but what was happening before when her dad was acting like this or when the cop was acting like this? Like it almost doesn't make sense, which is why like, you know, that moment that you can never get back once you learn the twist of a movie and you like watch it again forever. And you're just like, I can never see it that way ever again because I have this information. That is why I like feel this particular way because I'm like, oh, I like get what's really going on. And that's why they're all treating her this way. Do I think they're treating her the best way? Not really. But that is why that's how I come to understand it. But Nikisha, you had questions.
Yeah. So I just, yes, but more so of what we're talking about as far as just dissecting her motive in a way, quote unquote. So are we to believe that when the doctor in the beginning says you can go home and finish what you started, and then at the end when she goes back to the doctor, she's like, I finished what I started. There is some purposeful motive there. So are we to assume that that was part of her like alter ego, like in the back of her mind, like you were saying, Jamie, she realizes this is what she wanted to do. We know at the end, we figure out that was her plan all along, was to finish what she started. But as you go through it, it's seeming as if because she has forgotten things and she's remembering them as triggers come about. Do you think that there was still that motive in the back of her mind the whole time? Or how do you feel about like just that reveal?
I mean, it's interesting because of the specific language that's used. So like, I don't know, but maybe there's like a part of her subconscious that like does pick up on that. And that is like why then all of these things are kind of coming up is like, he said this, he seemingly not to reference Hypnotic and saying particular phrases that somehow have this very powerful effect on our psyche. But like this doctor seemingly says this phrase of finishing what you started. And there's like a part of her that is connected to that, but maybe it's not like the conscious part of her that's going home. And like, that's part of what's like conjuring this hallucination or like feeding the delusion. But I think that the delusion piece is definitely the Mildred Kemp stuff where like she's taking part of what she knows is reality and then is also like creating her own reality in the context of like this relationship with Rachel. But yeah, I maybe there's like a part where like that phrase kind of set set things in motion as well. But I don't buy that she like knew it truly, because like she's horrified by these things that she's seeing. Like she is like in pure terror. I would find it really hard to believe that like she knew this the whole time.
Well, okay, so then that begs the question when we get to the guy friend and she lets go of him and he falls off the cliff. So obviously he knows exactly what happened, and you know, this just kind of takes me back to Malignant, where you have like one person who's doing one thing and then the other person who is unaware. And it seems as if, like, as you're describing, like she's unaware of the things that are happening. And when she thinks that she didn't meet her guy friend on the dock or whatever, but then she goes back into her memory and she did see him, but I guess pushed him off. I mean, I guess I'm just asking the same thing. Like, do we think that that's just part of the alter ego or something that she, I mean, because she had to be conscious enough to go to the place,
right?
Talk to him or make the decision to kill him. But then a part of her is not remembering that.
And can I piggyback on that, about that scene? Did he tell her and that broke her?
Right. Yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah. Like we don't know what that conversation looked like, and we've been like waiting to like get that clarity. And maybe, again, like maybe she, like maybe psychologically she wasn't in a place to like hear that information. And so like she was still in this like very vulnerable state of like still processing what happened, again, like a year after this happened, and had to come to it on her own, which she does, but like at the expense of like many other people dying.
Right. So intense. Also, Brian, to answer your question, I don't know if you looked it up, but Mildred Pierce was a miniseries, an American drama television miniseries that aired on HBO.
It's also a 1945 American film noir starring Joan Crawford.
Wow. I don't know why that's in my head. I have not seen either of those. But obviously I am aware of Ms. Pierce.
Well, Kate Winslet plays Mildred Pierce.
I don't know. She was probably nominated for like a million Emmys, and I watch all that stuff. So that's probably what I know it from. And I feel like Mildred, like I don't have any older relatives named Mildred. So like that's the only Mildred I have a connection to.
Oh yeah. I think we're an anti-Mildred household.
That name will not be in the family tree.
No.
Yeah. If we have a daughter, I want her name to be Mildred.
No, sorry.
Goodness.
For all of you named Mildred out there who listen to the podcast, we're just kidding. It's a beautiful name.
It's great. You're great, Millie.
Millie.
Millie's a great nickname.
I do like Millie.
I love names with nicknames.
I like Millie as a nickname. Yes. Okay, I'm rethinking this now.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's better than calling your kid Dread.
Also true.
Dread.
Speaking of,
come here, little Dready.
Speaking of Dread, the directors of this were like camera operators or something on the like early '90s Judge Dredd movie with Sylvester Stallone.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
That's weird. Okay.
Great. They're like camera engineers or operators. I don't know. Anyway, back to Nikisha, because I know you have other questions.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're, knee deep into all of the mental health things. So one of my questions, and you actually answered a lot of them in what you were talking about before, but
great.
We see in the beginning that she is in this psych ward, and it's because she committed suicide. Now, my question is attempted suicide. Yes, sorry. She's still alive.
Yes.
Attempted suicide. What is the proper protocol after someone attempts to commit suicide? Because is this psych ward? She was in there for a year, and that's how long that the mother and sister have passed. So it seems as though she went immediately into the psych ward after her attempted suicide. Is that a thing? Are there other proper channels or steps that you are supposed to take before that, or was this accurate?
Yeah, so I think that is pretty spot on. So typically what happens at the point, so like in terms of how somebody ends up there, it varies, but I'd say more often than not, at some point, like EMS, EMTs, or police arrive on the scene and would escort somebody to a hospital, like to the emergency room. A lot of hospitals also have psychiatric emergency rooms, and that's most likely where somebody would be like complete their intake and be admitted into the hospital. So if somebody is like before an attempt, if somebody is expressing like suicidal thoughts and a plan and like the means to do so, they will also probably go through the same steps. But typically they're held for a shorter period of time, like to be observed. So that could be anywhere from like 24 to 72 hours typically, unless the staff continue to have concerns that you are a risk to yourself or others. So like for that time, like, you are admitted to the hospital. Like typically you don't have access to your phone, like the things that you came in with. And you're like meeting with all of the hospital staff, a doctor, psychiatrist, social worker, nurse, like all of the above. And so like actually being admitted, like following an attempt, an unsuccessful attempt, like I think it makes sense that she's there for longer, because of like the attempt that she made. But I still find it very interesting that she's there for a whole year. I feel like that's less typical. Some folks do have like, I would say lengthy stays, but typically maybe that looks more like a month or like definitely less than half a year. So, but that's like in anecdotes that I'm familiar with. And so like, I'm not speaking to everyone, but in terms of like, her being admitted to the hospital and like being in a specific unit, yes, that's real. The way the unit looked with those like weird locked doors with the tiny glass windows, maybe not so much, but I feel like that's, par for the course when it comes to like literally every movie and TV show that features some kind of psychiatric hospital. And also I think that is more akin to like when we think of institutionalizing people, like in the past, like that is way more of like not very like human centered and focused. That is like part of our history, which is like terrifying. But I don't think that most hospitals look like that currently. But there's still like mechanisms to, keep people safe and be able to like observe people. Like it is a hospital. And so like in terms of, and it's a psychiatric unit. So in terms of like privacy and, having that space to yourself, there frankly isn't really that much, because like that's not what the intention is, unfortunately. But like the reality is that like they're again, like in theory, I know that like not all hospitals treat people well, and like that is the reality of like the system that we're in. But like the theory is, the staff is there so that they're able to like observe folks, make sure that they're safe and not causing harm to themselves or anybody else.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was wondering about that, especially in a teenage psych ward, or I guess it would be broken up into age, or does it not matter?
It would be broken up into age for minors and then adults. So if they're under the age of 18, typically they would call it like a child psychiatric unit. Even if you're like 17 years old, like you're still considered a child. And so they do separate it by children and adults.
Okay. And you already talked a little bit about this, but I just want to confirm, because when she's having not necessarily the dreams, but when she is fully awake and seeing all of these images of death and her mother and all of those things, are we to believe that those are more on the dissociative episode side of things? I know you had mentioned her maybe being a combination of having, dissociative episodes and what was the second thing you said?
Like symptoms of schizophrenia. I think that it's more the latter, the main features of schizophrenia are hallucinations and delusions. So I think that like when she's seeing these visions of her mom or of that guy, I think those are hallucinations. But I think the thing with the guy is interesting because like, again, she did see him and then doesn't remember it until later. Like when she was having those visions, was that actively happening when she was like actually there with him and like threw him over that hill? Or was this really after the fact and she like returned home and like was in her bed and then had those hallucinations? Like, I don't really know. And I have a hard time differentiating between like sleeping and awake because like there's a lot of things that are happening in her bedroom when she's like on the verge of being asleep or like just woke up. And I'm wondering like, are these nightmares or is she awake and having hallucinations? And I can't really tell.
That's a great point. I want to go and err on the side with you of having the dreams in the bedroom. It's at least for this specific scene situation, that would make sense that she did the deed, went to sleep, and then had that kind of dream about it, and then had that nightmare. So then if we're talking about schizophrenia, then what's the difference between the dissociative thing that you were talking about earlier, the DID?
Dissociative identity disorder is what was formerly known as multiple personality disorder, which is having like a like distinct separate personality state or alter. And there is like a lot of memory loss associated with it too. So again, there's so many things going on in this movie that it's hard to know. And it's funny too, because like when you're meeting with somebody, part of what they teach you in school is how to like accurately diagnose somebody. And they call the process like a differential diagnosis because like there's all of these different, like we talk about the DSM, there's all of these different disorders that exist and we have all this information, but sometimes it's really hard to suss out specifically like, okay, what, like they're presenting with this, and this, there's some overlap with some of these diagnoses. How do we know that like it's this versus that? How do we know that like maybe this is causing that or vice versa? So it can get really complicated. And they're really throwing like a ton of stuff at us in this movie. So I can't tell, like, is the memory stuff because of trauma, which again makes a lot of sense? Or is the memory stuff because of dissociative identity disorder, where like if she's going into and like if she is her sister as an alter, let's say that's what they're posing, then like she doesn't remember like, you know, being herself in that moment because she's not, she is this alter. Right. So like that would also potentially explain gaps in time that she can't remember. So like there's like a ton going on and I don't envy her psychiatrist who would probably have a really hard time figuring out exactly what's going on. I don't envy him anyway because he did a bad job.
Yeah. So was she set up for, you mentioned all the triggers that she probably had when she got home. Was she set up for success? Or did we not see enough from the adult perspective in this movie to know if they were prepped, if they were like, if things were kind of laid out for them? Because we talked about bad dad syndrome earlier, where like as soon as he saw like weird things with her or questionable things, should he have called the doctor immediately? Should she at home have been having sessions with the doctor like every so often? Right. Again, I don't know how long this takes place over the course of like, I didn't track that, like a week, a month or whatever. So like from what we saw in this, was she set up for success to acclimate back to a life in which she could thrive or start to thrive?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think so. I think so. There's a whole department in like every hospital and like like all these units that exist that's called the discharge planning department. Like that's literally their job is to facilitate a successful discharge for like every client and patient that has been under their care. And part of that is like, are you going to, like, they come up with a plan and it's like, where are you staying? Like, who's going to be helping take care of you?
Yeah.
Are you going to continue with what they would call like outpatient therapy? So like therapy outside of the hospital. Are you on any medications? Like, how do we make sure that you continue to get your medications? Like, is there any other type of support that you would need outside of here? Like, be connected with a social worker or like a case manager or somebody else who's like also able to provide support. And like, seemingly she gets discharged from this hospital and like it's like a full cutoff and like nothing ever happens, even though they reference the doctor, but it almost feels like they reference the doctor as a threat, which I'm just like, are you kidding me? Like, this guy has been taking care of her for a year, and then his name being brought up is suddenly like something bad. Like, then what? Like, it totally undermines everything that he might have even done for her, which is wild.
He seems like a good dude at the very beginning, where he's like, he kind of really sets expectations well. I love the line in this movie where she's like, will I ever understand my dreams? And he's like, maybe you will, maybe you won't. Like, we might not figure it out. And I was like, what good expectation setting. Like, even after 10 months or a year, I was like, honestly, at the beginning of this movie, because I've just learned so much from this podcast and Jamie and you, Nikisha, just from like acting choices and stuff like that, especially as like side characters and things. Like, I was like, what a good way to, you're presenting the psychiatrist, the psychologist, whatever he is, as somebody who is caring, who's really trying to help, who like sets expectation and boundaries, and then he's used as a threat the rest of the movie. That was really disappointing to me, especially like that was wild.
It's so infuriating. And so, no, I don't think that she was set up for success and just like dumped on the street and then, you know, good luck and hopefully we'll never see you again. And that is not the case. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, that is intense. I didn't even think about it in that way of him brought up as a threat, but that's so true. But he was literally just there trying to help her. So, and this is what happens when you don't get the help that you need.
So I want to switch gears a little bit because I always find movies like this fascinating from an acting perspective. So Nikisha, when you get a script and you read it, and I understand that theatrical acting and film acting is very different in just from the concept of like on stage, you are going through the lifespan of the character, not necessarily in order, but you're going through all the motions like in the span of 2 hours, like real time, versus a movie where obviously things are being edited together, all that fun stuff. So I asked this question knowing that. My question for you is, when you get a script or you read something or you see something with an unreliable narrator, and obviously the editing is doing some of the work and the acting is doing some of the work and the script is doing some of the work, because as an audience member, you're being blocked from knowing the full story for narrative purposes and for surprises and twists and things of that nature. But when you get a script or if you got a script where you were playing a character who has an inner life, has a way that they see themselves or a way that other people see them, how do you balance all of that with the intention of the movie of trying to hide some things and revealing it later on? Like, can you talk a little bit about that process or just balancing that?
Yeah. And I will say that I have never been in the situation where I had to be an unreliable narrator, but if I had to take a guess at how I would just do it, I would first say that it's definitely a conversation that needs to be had with your director as how he wants it to be portrayed. Because if you are playing a through line character, you know, and you have all of the information, of course, that's something that is going to be kept from the very start within yourself, even though the audience doesn't know or the script doesn't share all of that. There's still something in the back of your mind that you know. So for me, I would absolutely still play it in the sense of knowing what's going to happen at the end, because that's also a part of it. And I want to reference, and I'm going to, spoiler alert for The Good Place. if you have not seen that TV show. But I think that's a great example of an unreliable narrator, because there's a twist that happens at the end. And what happened when they were filming it, and this is a TV show, they did not tell the actors what the twist was. Only the narrator was the one who knew what was going on. And so the actors didn't even have the chance to play that they couldn't even in any sense give away what the information was because they didn't know what it was. And so it was even more of a shock when they got the script that revealed the twist on that day. So I think it's an interesting thing. If I had to play the unreliable, all that to say, if I had to play the narrator in that sense, you always have that within you because that's a sense of yourself. And I think it just adds to the acting of you really honing in on being the one that's out of the know when you are in the know. And with this movie in particular, I think is when we have the conversations about, is she really forgetting things or is she not? Does she have the motive within her? Does she not? That I think she does a good job of this because we are having these conversations, because we are not fully aware. Because even watching it the second time, I was trying to see if there were any moments where I could see her kind of like have a little smirk or, body language that would suggest that she is in full control of knowing what is going to happen at the end. But I think it's what Jamie was talking about with all of the combination of mental illnesses that she might have, where there is actual forgetting and there is moments of maybe having an alter and all that stuff and figuring out that stuff in the moment. So yeah, I think in this one, she does do a good job of hiding it because there is no giveaway. But then there are some shows and some movies where there is the person that kind of gives it away a little bit because they do know what's happening. So I think it all just depends on what the direction of the particular show or play is that says you can give a little bit to let them know that something is up, or we're completely erasing it and you won't know anything until the very, very end. And with that, actually, that leads me to the question for you, Brian, about...
A question for me?
Yes. Just, with your vast movie knowledge and, how in-depth you are about how the cinematography of things, how things are directed and filmed. So with Alex being the character that is actually not around, and she's having to play that kind of thing of she's not giving it away because she thinks that she is alive or whatever we think that she is, if she's the altar of honor or, however. How do you feel about those scenes? Did you buy into it? I know you talked about the bad dad syndrome because he wasn't listening to her. But after you found out the twist, were you oh, well, then that makes sense, the interactions before? Or did they do a good job of just kind of lending itself to having Alex being actually there, specifically with how the scenes were set up when she was talking to the dad or, when she was standing in the funeral next to her sister and all that stuff like that? How do you feel about that?
Yeah. So I'm going to give a bad answer. I don't know because I wasn't looking for it. It was my first time watching it, so I was fooled by it. I definitely was. I'm a little embarrassed I was fooled by it because the scene where she's yelling at her dad and he's not even reacting to his daughter is so obvious. And also bad dad syndrome. I actually think that this movie was a combination of bad dad syndrome and bad explanation syndrome or over emotional syndrome, where when the daughter, not Alex, the main character daughter, is yelling at the dad about how she thinks that the wife is this, the wife is or the Elizabeth Banks character is this, is that, she doesn't cite any of her discoveries. So I'm telling Jamie, who knows the ending next to me, he's why isn't she talking about the fact that she found all this information out? Why isn't she giving him the hard evidence? I was so mad. I was just
he was me.
I was she called this place. She found this information out. If I were going, if I were if I wasn't having any kind of psychotic break, which I understand now is what was happening behind the scenes, I would have been like, listen, Dad, like I found these 5 things out. We should be careful. There's a possibility that she did this, but she just like has these like, she's yelling at him about like what she discovered or who the person is without like giving like, I just wanted more of a conversation. But then the bad dad syndrome is he's not asking her any questions about it. And like, because he knows something we don't, which is like, she is going to have a hard time adapting. And he also is bad dad syndrome because one, they bring her back to the same house this happened and he rebuilt the back house.
Weird.
2,
hated it.
She's there. The new stepmom, the new girlfriend is there when he says she wouldn't necessarily be there, even though I think he meant the car ride in the pickup. Like all of that. I'm also of the thing where if you already have children that you have a good relationship with or a relationship with, and you are bringing somebody new into their lives, whether it's a stepmom or something else, I truly believe that you are a family. It's not just the 2 of you. It's the 3 of you, the 4 of you, the 5 of you. There needs to be bigger conversations in terms of what that means for the family dynamic. And the dad can do whatever he wants. He's a grown man. He can, he's bad Down syndrome, but like, I just think that he needed to have a conversation with her. I know it's tricky in this situation because she's away. It may be triggering. He's nervous about bringing it up. But then, like, she's just there anyway. I just think conversations need to be had. Even if you have 2 very well-adjusted children with no trauma that is deeply rooted into their familial history, I think you should be having conversations like, hey, I know your mother's been gone for X amount of years, but I really feel a connection with this person. I hope you like them too. I'm looking to potentially get married again, and I would love for you 2 to be a part of that love. She's not replacing your mother. She is just another chapter in my life, and I won't like conversations like that should absolutely 100% happen before you're just like, you're not wearing your ring. Oh, because we're gonna get married. You know, like, I don't know.
Exactly. I agree with that. That was one of the main things that I was just like, why are we not having these conversations? Because even though he is a grown-ass man, he can do whatever he wants. You still are responsible for these kids, and that's going to be a part of the family dynamic. So they should have a say. I mean, you would also want to try to find someone, another partner who your kids would get along with. Like, why would you just ignore what they think about this person completely?
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
Also, total overreaction to the roast hitting the floor.
Oh my God.
But how did it hit the floor? I've never seen a cutting board that has like nails in it. Like the cutting board that she puts the roast into is like spiky.
How are you going to have a spiky cutting board and that not be a weapon?
Also, that wasn't enough roast for all those people.
Agreed.
It was a lot of people. Also just how they had the Elizabeth Banks character being shady anyway.
Yeah.
And then that just like begs the question though, was that just Anna's perception of her, or was she actually being just like shady? And why would you even tell, random side note, and then we can move on, but why would, when they're sitting at the diner and they're eating and she's like, yeah, I was wiping up people's like asses for the rest of my life, and I just was thinking to myself, I'm waiting for them to die. Like,
so
why would you say that?
Going back to, actually, you know what? That's a really good point. Going back to your director comment, I think that's bad direction. I think that character was deeply inconsistent and used solely as a red herring. I think that this movie is better if you give more consistency to that Rachel character so that you're not sure which way to go, because it's laid on so thick that she did these things. I would have found this movie with more layers, more interesting if she was disgruntled with her job and she's super happy she found this. She's in a really nice relationship with the father. Sure, it started out really in a not ideal way, and I'm not excusing their behavior, but I just think that it's a more interesting film if she's played consistent throughout, and maybe she does have temper issues. Like, you know, they talk about the fact that there was DV in her life, so she had to domestic violence, so she had to change her name for that, which is like,
just slipped in that piece of information, which I hated.
Yeah, she also could have gotten married and like kept the last. There's a lot of different things that it didn't have to be like an ex-boyfriend who was meanie. So I'm totally with you, Nikisha, on that. To answer your question, way too late. I think that was the flaw in the direction, not necessarily how the rest of it was portrayed, because that throws a lot of things off. But I do want to hear what your Rotten Tomatoes guesses are.
It's the Rotten Tomatoes game.
So let's get into it. What do you think this is rated on Rotten Tomatoes?
Well, when I was looking at the South Korean wiki page, they were saying that, that was a really high grossing movie and the remake came into mixed negative reviews. So I'm going to give it like a 40.
Jamie?
Yeah, I was going to say like a 46.
Okay, this has a 32. You guys were close-ish. The Uninvited is moody and reasonably involving, but suffers from predictable plot twists. I don't necessarily agree with that.
I don't think it was predictable.
I think that it suffers from like inconsistent storytelling outside of the fact that like the story is about inconsistent storytelling. Is that too much of a paradox?
No, but that makes sense. I don't know. I just need to watch the South Korean one, but
yeah.
All right,
I just love the concept of this though. Like the idea of it, the twist of it, like even if however it was executed, I just really was here for the concept.
I actually have more appreciation for this concept and this plot, having just talked about it with you two. It didn't make the movie better, but it made my appreciation of all of this better. And I'm excited in a couple of months to potentially watch the other one when I've forgotten a little bit of the details, not the twist, but the details. Definitely excited to dig into that. But on that note, let's quickly do the 4 S's.
Yes.
Skull, scare, shakes, and suggestions. The Talking Horrors 4 S's.
Okay, so those stand for skulls, scares, shakes, and suggestions, 1 through 10. Nikisha, let's start with you. Skulls, how do you think that this dealt with human behavior and mental health?
So I'm going to give this a 5, only because even though there was a lot of things happening. So even though it was all over the place, I think us just having this conversation and talking about different diagnoses and such, I would give it a 5 because we were able to have these conversations.
Cool. Jamie?
I think I'm going to give it like a 2.5 because I think, again, like there's some things that they like start off right and then it kind of all turns into shenanigans and is no longer sensical.
I'm going to go with a 3. I was going to give it higher until we talked about the therapist being the threat, and that really bummed me out.
Oh, man.
Nikisha, what are scares? Did this scare you at all? Did anything get you in this?
I'll give it a 1. It wasn't scary.
Sure. Jamie?
Yeah, a 1. Not scary.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a 1. It wasn't scary. I think it made...
Hey, you jumped
Yeah,
one time.
I give it 1 for the one time I jumped.
For the one jump.
Shakes. Will we be able to shake this off? Is this one that stays with you? Nikisha?
I'm going to give it a 5 because I just really like the twist and the concept, and that's what stays with me, and that's what allows me to suggest it to other people.
Jamie?
I'll give it a 3 because I have remembered this movie the many times that I've seen it, so it's not totally fading away.
I'm going to give it a 5 because I dug the concept. Our conversation of the concept was really fun, and then I'm excited to watch the original, so that's why I'm giving it a 5. And then suggestions. What else would you suggest with this movie, Nikisha?
I'm really terrible. I don't have any suggestion. I would just suggest watching the OG Korean movie.
Jamie?
I have 2, but one I think has been suggested before for something else, but If you want to go with like the mental health aspect, I would recommend Shutter Island. If you want to go with like, if there actually is somebody evil who enters your home and is scary, The Stepfather, which is the one that I've seen is the remake of the original like 1987 one, but the one I've seen is 2009 with Penn Badgley. How do you say? I don't know how you say his last name.
Not sure.
And Amber Heard apparently is in that movie too. Which
I'm gonna go with the Christian Bale movie, The Machinist. I'm not gonna say any more than that because I would, it's the one where he lost like all of that weight.
120 pounds or something insane.
Where he's like literally
post Batman weight.
Yeah, or he's like a skeleton. Or I think it was pre-Batman because he had to put on the muscle for Batman.
Oh, that's what it was. Yeah, it was in that order.
So I would suggest that one. Cool. Nikisha, take it away.
Fantastic. Well, that is it for The Uninvited. Thank you guys for listening to this episode. You can follow us on all social medias, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, at Talk Horror Pod, POD. And Brian, where can they listen to us?
Wherever you get podcasts. So that's like Stitcher, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Rate and review us there. 5 stars, please.
And thank you. And we are signing off saying stay away from the booty juice.
Also, why was this movie called The Uninvited? Like, who's uninvited? The ghosts, the things in her head, the Rachel, the stepmom? I don't know. That's my final thought on this.
Fantastic. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.